This next shader is called solid color, and we're going to now modify the solid color that is shown for the mesh on screen. So we still have a cube, it's still going to be one color only, but now instead of being black, it's going to be whatever we define it to be. So you can write the word color in the shader, and it can be in the subshader or it can be in the pass. If you had multiple passes, it would be used for those subsequent passes. But right now we only have one, so it doesn't matter where it is. So we're going to make it a predefined color that we're defining in code here, hard coding that, and we have, these are the RGB components, 0 for red, 0 for blue, and 1 for green, making it bright green. You can define a color as either 3 or 4 components, that's RGBA. So if you don't define an alpha channel, as I'm not doing here, it will be 1 by default. That's 1 or white, because in Unity we have color values that range from 0 to 1. So that's how you would do it without using a variable. If you want to use a variable, you can use what are known as properties. So properties is a block, just like subshader and pass. And you can define multiple types of properties. Right now we'll talk about color properties. So first you need the name of the property. The standard is to use an underscore before the name of the variable. And if you, in particular, use an underscore and then the word color, as we're doing here, then the material.color property that you may be used to using in Unity, including the components therein, material.color.r.g.b.a, that's what you'll be affecting. It's just a shortcut for material.setColor and then having this property in quotation marks after that. So if you're only going to have one color in your shader, or you have one color that's the most important, I'd highly recommend using this exact syntax for that name, this exact spelling. Okay, so after we have the name, then we have to have in parentheses another name that shows up in quotation marks, and that's going to be what you see in the inspector. So this word here, color, is what we came up with right here after the property name. Then you put a comma and then the type of property that it is. And if you go to the ShaderLab documentation for properties, you'll see what all of those are, and I'll get into more of them later in this series. But right now we just need color. So we have color, 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 all meaning something slightly different, but all necessary and important to make the shader work. You then need an equal sign and a default for the property, which in theory will be what shows up when you first create the material before you assign anything. It doesn't actually end up working out that way in every case, and I'll explain that in a moment. But first, let's make sure that we're actually using this property in the shader. So go ahead and copy the full name of that property, including the underscore, and just double click here to do that. Copy that. And then, instead of using parentheses down below, when you're using a variable, you use square brackets. And you put the name of the variable in those square brackets. So now, instead of having a color that's defined in code, we're going to define the color based on a variable, and that variable is assigned through the inspector. You can also, of course, script that. So go to open the color picker and move your mouse around. The color will update upon release of the cursor of your mouse pointer. So solid color is changing based on that variable. Very nice. Let's go over the quirks of what happens with defaults for properties. So I mentioned before, you need an equal sign and then a color definition after your property to be the default. And let's see when we will actually end up seeing that. So if we go over to our solid color shader, and as I mentioned, you can create a material based on that, then we'll see our default color, which was defined as red, 100. So you know, I just cut so I could create a shortcut for create material. I had a bunch of shortcuts which didn't transfer over because the application is no longer called Unity iPhone, it's now Unity, so I have to recreate those shortcuts for this new app. Alright, So I'll be using that from now on to create a new material. So we saw how a solid color would use its default when we created a material by selecting material, or in this case using the keyboard shortcut to create a material. However, if we just create a material without the shader selected, then we will have diffuse, the diffuse shader by default, all right? And we can change that. Take note of this main color property, change that to solid color, and it's not red, it's white. And the reason for that is, as I mentioned before, the property in each of these cases is actually underscore color in the shader code. And when you change shaders like this in the editor, it behaves exactly the same as using material.copy properties from material. So anything you had in the old material, if the property name matches, it's going to carry over to the new shader. So a way we could override that would be to rename this property. So we'll give it a, say, color2 in both cases. Save that. The first thing we'll notice when we go back to Unity is that the cube turns red because this color here does not reflect the old property that we had changed to brown, which was underscore color, but now it's underscore color 2. We haven't set up the color for that yet, so it takes the default. And when we go back to new material, we also see that it's red for the exact same reason. That's about all you need to know for defining the color property and using a solid color. Another quirk that you'll find throughout the properties of ShaderLab is that you can have properties, exact same property listed multiple times. So we have the color2 property defined 4 times with the name of color. And we see that 4 times in the inspector. We can go and change that color, and every single one will be updated. There's no reason I can think of to do that unless you needed to have the color show up to help you out visualizing things if you have a whole lot of properties. You can consider this a bug, maybe. I don't care enough to report it, so I'm not going to bother, but just so you know, that works.